Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's wonderful to be here and see all of you at such an important university from Brazil, USP, where tradition meets innovation, to discuss the future with such a diverse and qualified group of panelists. Welcome to. We'll talk about them in a minute. I would like to start introducing myself. My name is Lígia Guimarães. I am a journalist from Brazil, 20 years covering economics, currently working for Valor Econômico, which is our financial newspaper, our Financial Times or Wall Street Journal. And I have, in recent years, my main interest has been using my skills and experience to explore the future, not just what is likely to happen, but what's worth striving for. And 2025, people, it's not easy. I don't know if you noticed, but we're having a lot of pressures, a lot of uncertainty. Global economic growth remains under pressures. IMF and the World Bank are predicting modest growth all around the world. They're very worried. And now we have measures like US tariffs, have added complexity to international trade dynamics. And cooperation, it's not trendy these days, right? But doesn't seem, at least in economics negotiations. But we are here to talk about the future, hopefully. And for example, the IMF said that the future looks bleak, and the WTO said about 2026. The outlook for 2026 is bleak, and I'm very concerned. And the US, which used to be the investor's safe spot, safe place where everybody should go for safety, it's now has been stepping back from its traditional leadership, right? So what should it do? In all this environment, is it possible that we can increase cooperation when we're striving to keep our economies running, right? I would like to start the panel officially, introducing our very distinguished group of speakers. I would like to start here. Where is he? Oh, there. Kaspar Grathwohl, Executive Vice Chairman of the UBS in Switzerland. Alejandro Valenzuela, Chief Executive Officer of Banco Azteca, Mexico. Lucas Ferraz, former Secretary of Foreign Trade and Professor at Fundação Getulio Vargas in Brazil. And Claude, Dr. Claude Béglé, I'm trying my best with the pronunciation. Chairman and CEO of the Swiss New Water. To start, okay, I would like to start with your initial remarks. Up to 5 minutes. You don't have to speak the whole 5 minutes, but I would like to start by hearing of you. Do you think there is hope? Are we going to leave this room in this rainy day, gray in Brazil? I don't know if everyone that came to Brazil were expecting a tropical day and warm, and we're kind of cloudy today. But I would like to start asking our panelists in their initial statements if they think at the end of this conversation about economics in this event that talks about the future, hopefully, are we going to leave here hopeful or kind of depressed? I would like to start with Kaspar, please, if you can start your initial statement. It's this only microphone? Is there another microphone? No? Another one here. We can work. Oh, okay, let's see. Can you deliver this to Kaspar? Thank you. And then we go by that.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm not as negative as you are, I must say, because it's obvious and it's factually true. The world economy has slowed and is no longer growing the way it was. It is, however, still growing. It may well be growing below trend, certainly for this year, but also next year. But there is still actually fairly decent growth coming through. And that's why I'm personally not quite as concerned. Now, if you double-click on that growth, you'll see a few more worrying signs, I would say, because on the one hand, you have a number of risks, and there's more risks inside the growth, but you also have a number of, let's say, external factors, geopolitical nature, that could obviously derail that growth. And that's why I'm personally really, for example, watching what is the American consumer doing. Thanks to the American consumer, things have still been working. America is still consuming wonderfully. However, the consumption is a little bit, it's a bit black and white. There's actually a smaller fraction of population that is still consuming, but they're consuming at very high levels. These are the kind of inherent risks I mean. So there is more little factors that could sort of derail the overall picture, such as if tariffs, American tariffs, were all of a sudden going to be larger than what is currently sort of assumed, but also if, let's say, the labor market would deteriorate in the US even more than we currently think. Now, what is obviously so interesting about this is, right, and this is why I'm even more positive, is that the whole growth pattern is driven by a number of factors that lend itself really nicely for a sort of joint ventures and collaborations on a global nature. Some of the countries that are or may be seen as net beneficiaries of sort of a change in the world order currently are select European countries, but certainly also China, where there is very clear stimulus into the economy that creates winners, that creates opportunities to launch new businesses and maybe to pick up initiatives that previously weren't viable. But also there is a set of very long-term, very distinct trends, AI, and some claim AI is overhyped. I think absolutely not, because CapEx spending will, we believe, be 5 times next year of what it was currently. But artificial intelligence, particularly software related to AI, but then also what it means for robotics and power and resources, for example. These are areas that will be furthered, that will be deepened, and there is loads of international collaboration possible, maybe with slightly different players at the table than we would have seen it 2 years ago.
That's great. I would like to point out I'm not pessimist. I'm quoting IMF. I'm not necessarily pessimist, but I really like your take. Then we'll your initial remarks, and if you can express some of your expectation on collaboration, will it happen or not? Increase or not, right?
Well, friends, hello. I think when we are looking at the future of the economy, we have to make a distinction between short-term effect and long-term effect. Or, slightly in a different way to express it, between the economic indicators and the real element which will drive the future of the economy, the basic building blocks. So on the short term, we could all see that there is a disruption because of the tariffs, because of the supply chain. The world since a few months is not as it had been before. That's very obvious, everybody can see it. Now, what is strange is that despite of that, the stock exchange still is very high. And the indicators, well, did not exactly reflect what are the potential risks for the disruption of the economy longer term. And I will come back to that because it's really interesting. one of the major reasons why the stock exchange is high is because of the very big hope, you mentioned it, of the artificial intelligence. And those GAFA, those technology companies, they are driving the value of the stock exchange up. However, behind it, if you look at the fundamentals, there are issues. Basically, the artificial intelligence is in the hands of two countries, more than 95%. It's China and the US. And there is not much room for the others. So when you want to talk about cooperation, and if everybody says the future of the value of the stock exchange is on artificial intelligence, and you have only two players, then people will have to follow one of those two players, which might mean polarization of the world. We will come to that as well. Also, it will imply data centers, electricity. So in order to achieve it, you need also a lot of infrastructure investment. And I'm not talking here about the manufacturing, the agriculture. So the view which we could have is that when Mr. Trump launched MAGA, Make America Great Again, he did it not as a stupid initiative. He realizes, and now I move to the long-term effect, from the short to the long-term effect, in the long run, Asia will grow and dominate the world. And America will go down slowly. So he tries, before it's too late, to force people to reinvest. Typically, I'm a Swiss. We see our pharma industry. They have put extremely high tariff. The two largest pharma companies are investing over 40 billion now in the US. So to some extent, Trump has some sort of short-term success in forcing the others to come back to the US, in trying to have, again, employment, you know, in that part of the Midwest, which is where you lost jobs. But you know as well that is not so successful even in the short term. You know that the unemployment rate is growing. You know that the dynamism is a little bit going down, except in the technology side. So it seems that I can understand why he did that, but did it work very well? Well, to be seen. For the time being, I think it's not really there. What I see, which is much more worrying, is the fact that there will be a decline of the Occident, and there will be an increase of the global South. It's nearly unavoidable. Then you also have to make a distinction between the civilian economy and the military economy. In the US, you have something which is nearly not under control, neither under the Republican nor under the Democrats, which is the militaro-industrial complex, which is basically, I should stop?
No, I'm just saying, you are saying so many interesting things, but you're opening and we will have to jump back to that.
So I will...
So, yeah.
I will go very fast.
Yes, and just tell me and summarize if you're more optimist or pessimist.
I go very fast. So there will be new trading blocks. There will be, which is much more important, not only an impact on the economy, but on the society, or on the value system of the society. And I believe that the value system of the Occident, which is based on individualism, which means freedom, which means technological development, that is maximum 1 billion people on the earth. And the rest will, as a way of retaliation by what is happening now, especially in the US, the rest will look for cooperation by default because they are left out, because we have moved from cooperation to egoism. So the way to react to that is to make new alliances. And I repeat, it will be not only economical, but it will be the values of the society, it is the way how we consider the democracy, it is the way how the economy can develop, because it will not be just private sector. There will be, when you have countries like China, you will have a much stronger cooperation between the public and the private. I stop here.
We will come back, not stop, just a little pause. You come back. Lucas, your initial remarks. From this point of view of Brazil, these people came to visit us.
So thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a great pleasure to be here discussing with such a distinguished panel. And I would say the topic of the moment today, the tariff war, the retreat of the United States from globalization, and all the consequences and repercussions of this unilateralism that we have been witnessing from, especially in the case of the second administration of President Trump.
Don't deliver everything, okay? Just first tell you more your expectation, and then we'll come back to go deep on that subject.
So I would say that over the last 5 or 4 decades, we have lived in a very prosperous process of globalization. The world economy has lifted nearly 1.5 billion people out of poverty over this time. So a very beneficial process, especially for poor and developing economies. And even in the case of the United States, which is even more perhaps controversial, even the United States perhaps was one of the countries that benefited the most from this whole process. There is a recent study that was released by the Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, the central bank, that says that because of the American engagement in globalization from the beginning of the Second World War until nowadays, the United States is richer today in more than $3 trillion, just because of this engagement in this whole process. Let's remember that since the beginning, since the end of the Second World War, when we have when we formalized the general agreements of tariffs and trade, and the United States was a leading economy in pushing this agenda forward, the United States was already the most open economy in the world at that time. And after 8 rounds of multilateral trade negotiations at the WTO, of course, the United States benefited a lot, because basically all the rest of the world, especially developed economies in Europe and also in Canada and many others, they basically opened up their economies to American exports. So it was also a very prosperous and beneficial process, even for American economy. But of course, the United States has nowadays many internal problems, social problems. For instance, the increase of social inequality, the loss of manufacturing jobs. But it must be said that those social malaise that the United States has been going through over the last decades has much more to do with a process of, automation, with the technological advancements in the global economy than to trade itself. So there are many economists that agree, there is basically it's a consensus, that the main factor behind, increasing income inequality in the United States, the losses of, manufacturing jobs, the main factor behind, is automation, is technological progress, not trade. So what Mr. Trump is doing now, in spite of, regardless of his reasons for doing this, whether or not he believes that China will outcompete the United States in the coming year or not, the medicine, the measures that he has been taking in the beginning of his second administration is a big mistake. And why is a big mistake? Because those measures will not address the main causes of the social malaise in the United States, the two ones that I mentioned, social inequality and the loss of manufacturing jobs. On the contrary, if you decide, to increase tariffs, if you decide to take a more protectionist approach for the American economy, let's remember that tariffs are a regressive tax. So it means that tariffs penalizes much more poor people than rich people. So when a country like the United States or even any other country decides to close its economy, the consequences will be just the opposite, increasing income inequality and the continuation of job losses in the manufacturing sector, mainly because of the loss in competitiveness and productivity and misallocation that will be generated in the American economy. So I'm going to stop here. This would be my first remarks. Thank you.
Thanks. Alejandro, I would love to know, thanks if you, in your initial remarks, following Lucas, if you can give an input if, as America Latina, you're hopeful that we can increase cooperation in this scenario that Lucas described.
Thank you, Alicia. Well, good morning to all of you, and it's a pleasure being in this panel. And thank Frank again for this kind of invitation. Hearing all the initial remarks by all these very distinguished guests, it comes to my mind, I've been in the public sector and the private sector for a long time. And let me just give you some contrasting things as questions. Are we moving from a world that used to cooperate to a world that is more confrontational? Are we moving from rule-based world where we try to generate certainty to more distrust and weaponizing trade? Are we moving from a relationship-based world to a more transactional-based world? And clearly, the perspective you have for many countries is different. Mexico, for instance, and every time I come back to Brazil, I'm always very impressed. But a compare and contrast is quite fascinating. I was reviewing Mexico trades today probably more than all Latin American countries combined include Brazil. Why is this? Because we have a border of 3,000 kilometers with the Americans, where we have more or less tried to insert that economy to the US one. Clearly, the MAGA has changed completely the way we play this game. And the total trade that we do with Brazil, Brazil being the largest economy in Latin America by far, it's less than 1% of our total trade. 85% of Mexico's trade goes either to the US or to Canada. Now, having said that, I think that it's also very important as we try to look outward that countries do an examination of themselves and see where they stand today. In the case of Mexico, it's a country that has worked a lot to move from a very closed economy, which was based on oil exports only 40 years ago, and today it's a very open economy. But we played a game that has changed completely. And the question is whether this game is going to continue under the new Trump rules, or we'll go back to some sort of place where cooperation becomes much more than rhetoric. I've seen a lot of discourses by diplomats talking about the Latin American integration, the capacity of Latin America to move farther and closer together. That hasn't happened. There's been plenty of efforts. And why is this? I think it's something we should be always trying to analyze. We haven't been able to have a vision of where we want to stand as countries for the next 30 or 40 years. Every time a government comes, at least in my country, it's a new world. Everything that his predecessor or her predecessor did was wrong. but they will restart again and do a new country. So if we don't have the capacity to have policies in where, what kind of education we want for our countries, what kind of reskilling and retooling we want for our countries, how much can we invest in research and development, how much can we do in health, how much can we do in assigning good pension funds, how much can we do to maintain a clean environment, how much can we do in funding good universities. A lot of these questions are not being rightly addressed, and even more, Brazil is not exception than Mexico, our regional development. We have different economies within our economies. Give you an example. In Mexico, in the northern part, which is close to the US, the average education is 12 to 13 years. The life expectancy, it's over 70 years. And the GDP per capita is closer to what you will see probably in some of the East Asian economies. If you go to the south, to Chiapas, which is in the border with Guatemala, average education is 4 years. Life expectancy, it's a little over 60 years. And GDP per capita is closer to Zimbabwe. That we had here some people. So within our own countries, we need to address these disparities, and that's already a challenge for itself if we want to insert ourselves to the rest of the world. And sometimes these things are not looked at closely to make sure that we're moving in the right direction. Obviously, I'm optimistic because clearly we're discussing these things. But if we don't work on the institutional framework, if we don't try to reestablish multilateralism as we had it before, and it just goes to rhetoric, we're going to be wasting our time.
Great. Thank you for all your initial remarks. And what I think is special about this event, I have been covering economical events, and we talk about the outlooks and the IMF and the World Bank. What I think is special about this event is that we're not just talking about economics, but we're talking about economics from integrating, how can we integrate the global south and the north? We are talking about hopefully a better future, as not only about talking about the numbers, but for the people, right? And then what I hear in Lucas and Alejandro's remarks is that Latin America and the global south, we have huge challenges to overcome, like the inequalities, the social challenges, the unemployment, and things that we need. We really need a sustainable growth to overcome, right? And what I think it's a very rich opportunity. For example, I would like to just start ask for a question for Lucas. And following, I think we're very similar remarks here, but I think they converse. But I think when we talk about how can Brazil and Latin America and the South Global take more advantage for sustainable growth amid this scenario, do you think it's more of a homework case? For example, people say that Brazil is not a very open economy and that we should have worked more towards that even before Trump's tariffs. We had a kind of a plot twist, a small plot twist this week. I don't know if you saw it, but suddenly Trump said he is very fond of our President Lula, and the United States missed our coffee, and they are talking in a more friendly tone. But do you think, Lucas, when you say Brazil and other countries, Latin America, but especially Brazil, we should be more open, we're very protectionist also. Do you think it's this the priority? What do you think it's missing so we can take advantage of the support of the North, the global North?
Yes, if you compare Brazil to Mexico, you know, we have completely different realities when it comes to trade. Mexico is a fully integrated economy, especially in the case of the United States. As you said, most of Mexican trade is made with the United States and Canada because of the USMCA. But you also have many other trade agreements with the European Union and many other countries. But Brazil is just the opposite. Yeah, so, of course, the issue of economic growth is much more complex than just opening up to trade. You know, opening up to trade, I would say, is a very important dimension for productivity increases, and of course for economic growth, but just one dimension. In the case of Brazil, of course, we still have, huge homework to be done in terms of the improvement of our business environment. Brazil has just approved, a very important tax reform, It will, of course, have impacts in our productivity. It will put finally an end in the regional tax war that we have in our country that creates, lots of, misallocation of resources and of course harms our total factor productivity in our country. But on top of that, we still have a very, important job to be done when it comes to increasing the level of international insertion in our country. Brazil has a very, I would say, shallow or weak network of trade agreements so far. Perhaps the most important trade agreement that we have until today is Mercosur itself, which was signed in 1991. And last year, we finally announced the conclusions of negotiations between Mercosur and the European Union. Of course, this is good news for international trade, for international insertion in our region, not only Brazil, but also Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay. But it must be said that this negotiation took us 25 years to be concluded, which is a shame, which is really a very complex process that shows how, Mercosur lacks dynamics. Mercosur needs to be reformed. Mercosur needs to be more flexible and perhaps allow its countries to negotiate trade agreements, unilaterally. No need to negotiate trade agreements as a bloc. And until today, Mercosur declares itself as a customs union, and this is the main justification to negotiate trade agreement as a bloc. But we all know, all the experts that, know the Mercosur in details, the Mercosur's framework in details, we all know that Mercosur is far from being a customs union. Starting with the common external tariff, there are more than 40% of exceptions. So a lower network, let's say a very shallow network of trade agreements. We still have higher tariffs, very high import tariffs. Average import tariffs in Mercosur, especially in Brazil, is around 12%. It's just double the global average for developing economies, and it's nearly 4 times the average import tariffs for developed economies, exception made by for the United States at this point in time, because the United States is completely, out of the mark, over the last 6 or 8 months. So Brazil needs to improve its network of trade agreements, but in order to improve its network of trade agreements, and even to lower its tariff, since we have a common external tariff, we need more flexibility in Mercosur. But it's very important to say that this is an important dimension of our, public policy that so far, has never been received, that, let's say, the necessary attention, the necessary priority from Brazilian policymakers. And this is one thing that we must address, let's hope, in the next presidential elections next year in Brazil, especially now that everybody in the world is, is aware of the consequences of protectionism, of, unilateralism, and perhaps this will be something positive for the debate here in Brazil in order to reorient our economic agenda when it comes to international insertion.
Great, thank you. It seems like all of us have some steps forward to move forward cooperation, right? The scenario and our homework and our willpower. Kaspar, I would really like your take because we're talking about the effects of this Trump tariffs, the protectionism towards Latin America and the global South. And I would like, as a chairman at the UBS, to know how the wealthy families, the wealthy investors are reacting to suddenly the United States. You never thought in the past that you would hedge against the United States, or how are the wealthy families reacting to these changes in the United States not being the safe spot as it used to be, right?
And that's a tough one, actually, for most of sort of the wealthiest families, because if you run a business, needless of sort of a new direction of American politics, it is still your most important market. It may be slightly, growing slightly less, but it's still the largest market out there, and you just cannot afford not to be there. But obviously what makes things a lot more difficult is, on the one hand, what has happened to the US dollar. Sort of all your American business, depending from where you look at it, are now just worth a lot less. And there is a sudden volatility attached to maybe your revenues out of the Americas. But in addition, there is this very high degree of policy uncertainty. So you don't quite know what to expect. So a lot of investors right now are thinking, do I need to start adding a country premium, a risk premium to the United States? And that then obviously in turn drives what is your investment appetite on the ground. So to give you sort of a tangible example, if maybe you're an entrepreneur and you were thinking about investing a few hundred million, let's make it 200, 250 million into more of an infrastructure, let's say an AI data center investment in the US. You may actually now think twice, although this is exactly the region where you probably can expect some support from the government. But it's because of that policy uncertainty and because of the US dollar effect, a bit of a risky venture. So maybe, and we see that in our business, a lot of families start rethinking, maybe you try to find a safer way to invest in the States, maybe smaller amounts, maybe you start buying up an existing business that is already there and only spend half of the money. And at the same time, you need to work hard on being very visible, because it matters with whom you do business in the States, and it matters with whom you are being seen. And just to add anecdotal evidence, we have seen multiple iterations where families are buying sports businesses because of that thinking to up their visibility in a good way in the United States.
And how is that going? Is it a good investment? It's working fine.
Well, it's a very particular category of investment, but I personally would argue American sports are actually very interesting investments. The American sports leagues have particular features that are nowhere else on the planet, i.e. a team cannot relegate, right? So if you own a club, you always own a share of the media and broadcasting rights, as long as sort of that business is flourishing, yeah. And by the way, just one side effect, obviously, of that whole US dollar story is also the rise of gold.
People are coming back to basics, the gold, as we did a long time ago. I would just come back to the side. I would like just to ask Alejandro, because now I would like just to think about, to take advantage of we have such a geographical richness in this panel. I would like to start talking about the future, what's working, right? We're interested to know what's going to be good about the future and what's going right. Do you feel, often, Kaspar, this is a nice example, things are very tough in the US, but you still have to go to the US, so maybe you buy something that you didn't look at before, like sports teams or sports club. Do you some other basic things that we think it's maybe regional partnerships, new partner. If the old one is not there, you try other. For example, Mexico and Canada have been evolving some kind of relation. Do you see that working, and do you think it's a path for a better future?
Sure, Ligia. I think we have to invest ourselves in that. And let me try to propose 5 ideas that could work in the sense, but we really have to invest ourselves. The first one is we need to improve intra-regional trade. And as it was said before, we need to simplify customs procedures, standardize regulations, reduce friction, which I think is very important. Then something that has always been a dream, and we haven't been able to work at it, develop regional value chains. So someone will have to specialize in the auto. Brazil could specialize in the aviation industry, for instance, Mexico in the auto industry.
Not geographical, but the thing we
generate scale.
make.
Generate scale, because otherwise a lot of these industries that need a lot of fixed investment, if they don't get the volume out, they will not be able to be competitive. Then after that, infrastructure investment. I mean, all these countries have problems with infrastructure. So we need to invest a lot in infrastructure, both physical and digital. Here, we have to work in both worlds, because otherwise, if we don't have the railways, the airports, the digital connectivity, and even the payment system. In infrastructure, sometimes we forget that the payment system is fundamental. Can we go outside the dollar or the euro system and develop something ourselves to make sure that we make it much easier? Brazil has probably the best payment systems in Latin America with the PIX. Mexico has a very good one with SPAY. But we haven't been able to connect ourselves so that money can move in and out rapidly. Obviously, there is the crypto world nowadays, which still has a lot to prove, but it's there. And I think that with those initiatives, and I wrote another one, if this thing allows me to talk about it in a second, I think that we can actually start working together as a region. We have challenges also. I mean, very few people in our continent speak good English. And we need our workers to understand and speak fluent English, and perhaps nowadays more and more Mandarin, because of the reality of the world. And with that, we also need poverty alleviation schemes to get people out of the poverty trap, which frequently it's very contrasting in Latin America, the difference between the people that have something to move on and the people that are missing something to move on. And those gaps actually generate frequently a lot of problems, a lot of friction. And politicians also need to be much more accountable with their public spending. I think the quality of public spending, you were talking about taxation. Brazil does an outstanding job in taxation. I think it's 35 or 37% of GDP. It's actually obtained from taxes. In Mexico, it's less than 20%. And, but a lot of that expenditure is badly done. Why? Because the government, in turn, all it wants to do is be popular during its term. What happens afterwards, like Louis XIV said, après moi le déluge. So after myself, who cares, in a sense. I think it's fundamental that we start thinking of what we need to do in terms of, in the next 30 years, in education, again, in infrastructure, in health, in dealing with the insecurity, in dealing with the main issues, and stick to that plan. That's why the Chinese, that's why the Koreans, that's why the Japanese have been able to attain all these goals. Korea had a level of development, South Korea had a level of development lesser than Mexico in 1961. Today, it's way ahead of us for one very simple reason, continuity. They were able to fix on the problems and the challenges they had, and they've been working on them. On the contrary, Mexico has been zigzagging, and obviously, we haven't moved as fast.
It was a state strategy, not a government strategy,
Absolutely.
right?
We need the state to look forward, not the government. And that's something that we've been missing too. And just to end, the quality of public servants, it's been deteriorating over the past 20 to 30 years. So if we don't have the quality of public servants and the quality of regulation required, mainly with this AI and this new digital world, we're going to be in trouble, especially in the financial sector.
When we talk, Dr. Claude, when we talk, oh, can you give the microphone back? Thank you. When we talk about the countries we're talking here, we usually imagine United States, Trump, Brazil, Lula. We think about governments first, right? But in all of these challenges we're facing, like to improve and to increase the economy, what do you see is, especially for the future, what is the role of the private sector? What should do, what works, and what is missing? What should be done? A mix about public, private. What do you see that works?
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. because I think that the future of the cooperation will not be trade and only trade. We are omnibulated by what is happening, but actually we have to include in the trade discussion other elements of the global economy and the global society. And this is where it's partially the private sector, but not only. An example. If I take a small country like mine, Switzerland, because we are small and very export-oriented, we are one of the leaders in the world in the free trade agreements. Now, already a free trade agreement would imply that plus protection of the investment plus double tax treaty. But today, when we negotiate the free trade agreement, it goes much beyond that. Some of the political parties, to approve the free trade agreement in the parliament, they will want to have protection on human rights. That's not exactly private sector, not only private sector. Those are normally the leftist parties who ask for human rights. But for example, for the renegotiation of the agreement with China, one of the cornerstones is the human right. It is also the ecology, the environment protection. When we negotiated the agreement with Malaysia and Indonesia, well, there was the protection of the forest. That came from the ecologists. So you see that in those negotiations between North and South, you start having more and more elements which goes much beyond the only economic bottom line profit and loss of a company, but it involves a global approach on how two countries want to cooperate. We have actually just signed also an agreement with Mercosur. But an interesting one is we have signed, and it entered in vigor last week, an agreement with India. And with India, on top of all what I said already, we have agreed on not only a $10 billion investment, but we have agreed on the creation of 100 million jobs. So you see that we are now moving from strictly economic discussion to discussion having a much broader impact on the society on both sides. That's very interesting. So I also can imagine a new way of cooperation between South and South. And I really believe that those countries will start developing not only economic opportunities, but a way of thinking which is a bit different than the multinationals, which would be based in the US, in Europe, perhaps in Japan, and South Korea. So you will be able to develop a new way of looking at the world where there will be much less difference between government, private sector, and universities. I think the future, the cooperation, is not only a geographic cooperation between different regions and different countries, but the cooperation will be a partnership with the government defining norms. So, for example, if you want to go for the ecology, air belongs to everybody. Water, we were talking with the princess. You have in certain countries the water coming from the mountains, but they build dams. And then
because I think, just to complement, but I think the balance is the governments to protect like everyone's like the nature, but not to make it so difficult that the private sector, because we can't trust blindly the private sector, but we can't let the government not anything happen. It's a mix of that.
So I don't want to be longer. So the aim, the goal, the vision should come from the government. It should not be too heavy in regulatory because it would kill the private initiative. But the vision comes from the government. The money and the efficiency come from the private sector. And probably when you involve the universities, you bring the brain power, the creativity, and they have to work the three together. That's the future.
Excellent. Frank, how are we in time? Are we going one more each? Great. Yes. I would like, instead of a summary, I would like, because I really don't want all these people who came to talk to us to feel depressed. So I would like to end in the final remarks, each one, talking about opportunities in the future. I'll help a little bit to pitch, like artificial intelligence is gaining space in the trade, in the world trade, the data, the services, it's becoming relevant. Do we have new opportunities to partner and cooperate differently in green energy, green investments? I would like if you all can a final round about that. And I would really like, at the end, now, so I don't take a lot of time, but to thank you all for coming here. It's a brilliant panel. I'm very happy to be here with you. Maybe we can go this again, Kaspar, and following back. Opportunities, good news from the future that are coming toward us.
In terms of good news, I happily jump on the artificial intelligence topic you brought. I think artificial intelligence is, and this may sound bizarre, still widely undervalued right now, because most of the focus is on infrastructure and language models, and we have only started to see come through the effects of software developments, new services, new businesses, new business lines being developed based on the existing AI infrastructure and languages. And that, I find, is a tremendously interesting space, i.e. software applications. Couple that with where we're looking more into physical AI, robots, autonomous drive, where actually the AI component in itself is probably not quite as challenging, but it's the entire, coming together of the mechanical pieces, the movements, the fabrics, etc., because it's not that straightforward to build a functioning robot. So basically, you not only need the compute and the software, you actually need a supply chain in a particular region that can actually deliver on that whole thing. And that, to me, totally opens up the spectrum on where tremendous businesses and gains can be generated on the back of AI.
Thank you, Claude. Green would be fine if you take green, right?
Let's trust human brain efficiency. You were talking about the very rich people. Actually, one of the very interesting developments is that those ultra-rich people, they go for foundations. And very often, in the family offices, they do not only look how to invest in order to have the highest yield, but they try to create a mood, a spirit, which is the spirit of that family office, and they go for green, or they go for some of the causes. So we can let them try to define what they want. I really believe personally that we have to have the business going beyond the strict quarterly bottom line. We have to add, in the best of the cases, a spiritual value, a humanistic value, an environmental consideration, a social improvement, and this is absolutely possible. So again, it can be guided by the government, but we should leave to the people the freedom to invent and to do it the best way. It's quite possible to have completely new models. And I will take one example and I will stop there. If you take artificial intelligence, the Chinese way, compared to our Western way, we have laws. And if you are up to that point, you didn't breach the law. If you're on the other side, you go to jail. They have, with the artificial intelligence, you help an old lady crossing the road, you get 2 points. You do something else, you lose 3 points. So they have a curve in terms of how to assess the morality. This happens to be very similar to the karma of the Indian. So now you have the Chinese and the Indian who start having similarities which nobody had expected before. I think when we move out our traditional patterns, we can create new ones which go much beyond the profit and loss, but which create a new vision of the society.
Thank you. Final remarks, opportunities from the future.
Quickly, just a few remarks on cooperation, my last remarks, before delving into let's say, the opportunities in terms of climate change, especially in the case of Brazil. I think we really need to reform, the multilateral institutions in order to foster cooperation in this very multipolar world that we have been living in. So we must remember that the Bretton Woods institutions, the so-called Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, at the time was the GATT, they were created when we had a completely different balance of economic power in the world. So nowadays, at that time, basically we had the United States as the sole hegemonic power in the global economy, and nowadays we live in a clear and gradually more and more multipolar world. And the institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, the UN Security Council, must reflect this new economic geography that we have been living in. The WTO, in the case of trade, needs to be reformed. We need, to have China complying with the WTO rules. First of all, we need to have, new provisions when it comes to digital trade, when it comes to intellectual property, when it comes to services, when it comes to climate change. All those topics should be discussed at the WTO and try to avoid, as much as we can, unilateral measures in those fields, in those areas. When it comes to the opportunities, for today, especially in the case of Brazil, I see a new window of opportunities, when it comes to new trade agreements, so many countries, especially in the case of the European Union has been much more active in opening up discussions, trade discussions with new partners, China, Japan, South Korea, and all of them. What they are trying to do is to reduce their dependence on the American market, So they need new trade partners, they need to diversify. And of course, Brazil could take advantage of this new window of opportunity and through Mercosur try to formalize new trade agreements and increase its level of international insertion. When it comes to climate change, needless to say, Brazil perhaps is one of the leading countries when it comes to low energy costs, with a clean energy matrix, one of the cleanest, perhaps one of the cleanest in the world. And just here in the state of São Paulo is a powerhouse when it comes to the production of biofuels like ethanol. And from ethanol, you can produce biogas, you can produce biomethane, you can produce the sustainable aviation fuel. So lots of opportunities for Brazil, but of course, we need to do our homework. We need to keep improving our business environment, and we keep, trying to open up the Brazilian economy to trade in order to attract more investments.
Thanks, Lucas. Alejandro.
Sure, well, I'll just share a vision with, I think, 4 main objectives. As you said, we need fewer and stronger institutions. Most of these Bretton Woods institutions, they're outdated. When I was in the Mexican government some years ago, Belgium had a bigger weight than China at the IMF. I mean, Belgium bigger than China at the IMF, it was nuts. So fewer and stronger institutions. Second, practical economic infrastructural cooperation. We need to share, both in the physical and digital world, capacities, because the market is very big in Latin America. And again, sorry for having a Latin American perspective, but I think that's what I was requested to do. And we need that cooperation and take advantage of the economies of scale that can develop. We need urgently to depoliticize long-term commitments. If we don't have, as Ligia was saying, the state view and not the government view, we will not move faster than we've been doing in the past. And we need also grassroots participation that build a shared Latin American identity. And this is a bottom-up and a top-down effort that needs to be worked from every municipality in Latin America all the way to the national governments. I'll finish with that.
Thank you, everyone. I will just leave my 50 cents that I really hope that I learned a lot from all your experience. I really hope we can all, as countries, cooperate with each other, as we only have one planet to build the economics, right? It's the resources we have are just the same for our planet, so I hope we can think more of the common good, right? For the economics, even the great wealthy people, the money, we can cooperate for sustainable growth for all of us, because we are only one planet, right? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, all my panelists, Kaspar, Claude, Lucas, Alejandro. Thanks to everyone who stayed here with us until now. Thank you very much. Thank you, Frank.